Then Porter looked at the bargaining power of suppliers. Who is providing the key inputs and components for your product, for your firm? And do these suppliers have leverage over you? Do they have power? And can they extract some of the profits that you otherwise might make? He also looked at the bargaining power of the customer. Who are your customers? Who buys from you? Do they have leverage? Are they able to extract profits, or do you have leverage over them? And finally, he looked at the rivalry among existing competitors. How intense is it? And in particular, do the firms in the industry compete hard on price? Do we see frequent price wars? Or do we see something that looks more like friendly competition, not quite so vicious, perhaps something where there's mutually beneficial work being done by competitors? These are the 5 forces then that shape strategy, that shape the profitability of an industry. You'd love to be in an industry where there's high barriers to entry, low power for suppliers and customers, where there aren't many alternatives, attractive substitutes, and where price wars are very infrequent or non-existent. So let's take a look at the airline industry again and see if we can apply this framework. Let's start with barriers to entry. At first glance, you might think it's very difficult to enter this business. It's got to be expensive and challenging. And yet, if you look over the past few decades, you see that many new players have entered this business. Therefore, we must conclude that the barriers cannot be so formidable. Why is it easy to enter the business, or at least moderately easy? Well, let's start with planes. Do you need to go out and buy new planes? You don't. You can lease old planes. And there are many of them available because, frankly, many companies are going bankrupt in this business every year. Pilots. The military trains them for you. And so you have people that you don't have to train from scratch. Airports. Well, do you have to fight for a slot, an expensive one, at an airport like LAX or JFK in New York? You don't. You can go to smaller regional airports where states and counties are trying to draw traffic for economic development and tourism, and you can get access to a slot and start flying your planes. Barriers to entry are not so high. What about buyer power? Well, who are the buyers? The end users, the customers like you and me who fly? Well, we look at the product and we don't see much differentiation. Frankly, we aren't very loyal because there isn't really a difference between United and American, between any of the airlines that we look at. They look rather homogeneous. Moreover, there are travel sites like Expedia and Travelocity that offer us perfect price transparency. We can compare and look for the best bargain, and we often buy on price. We're highly price sensitive when it comes to air travel. Who are the suppliers and do they have power? Airbus and Boeing provide jumbo jets. A couple more players provide regional jets, but there aren't many alternatives when it comes to getting planes. As for labor, you've got to negotiate with powerful unions. And as for fuel, well, OPEC is a cartel that's going to drive the price of oil. So suppliers and buyers, they're powerful in this business. How about the threat of substitutes? Well, what do we have as substitutes for air travel? We certainly have other forms of transportation like the car and the train and other forms that we might use, but also we have things like video conferencing and the internet that provide us an alternative. So a business person doesn't have to go from New York to Shanghai on a plane. They might be able to get the work done in other ways using technology. And do they compete on price? Well, you betcha they do. There's not much differentiation. It's a homogeneous product. But there's also a very unique characteristic of the airline business that drives intense price competition. There are very high fixed costs in this business and virtually no variable or marginal costs. What do I mean by that? Well, what's the incremental expense to put you on a plane in that next seat that's vacant? It's virtually nothing. You might say it's peanuts, literally. As for the fixed costs, well, getting the plane in the sky, it's all fixed cost. There's very little expense that varies depending on how many passengers are on the plane. Well, what happens when you have high fixed costs and virtually no variable cost? Well, anything the airline receives above zero is what we call contribution margin. It's dollars that could go toward covering those fixed expenses, and if we cover them all, could go toward profitability. So there's an intense price competition to try to fill the seats. Moreover, the seats are perishable. That is to say, when that plane takes off, you can never sell that seat on that flight again. So you're dying to fill the plane to be able to be as profitable as possible. And it leads